Turn on the TV for the evening news. They got plenty to fear and nothing to do. Another somebody who's gone too far makes you wanna put up your guard. Fear is easy, love is hard. So we draw up another dividing line. We label each other and we choose a side. Peace could come at quite a cost, so we won't build a bridge across. Fear is easy, but love is hard. Fear will leave you hiding in the dark, but love will bring a light into your heart. So do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I'm sorry, baby's what you should have said. But she wouldn't listen even if he did. They'll die without forgiveness soon, but no one wants to make a move. Fear is easy, love is hard. Fear will leave you hiding in the dark, but love will bring a light into your heart. So do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. It's hard to give your heart to a world that can break it, to offer love to those you're afraid you will forsake it. But a well-defended heart is always looking for a fight in a lonely war against an endless night. But love can bring a light. Fear will leave you hiding in the dark, but love will bring a light into your heart. So do not be afraid. Oh, it comes down to a simple choice. Shouting devils or a still small voice. One is spreading fear and dread. Oh, but love has always said, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
Good morning, everybody. Hi. This is new and exciting. I hope you're all having a great Sunday with your families, and I hope you had a great week. Let's see. Oh, I've got to stop this other video. Hold on. Whew. All right, just a second. This is my first time doing this kind of a video recording, so hopefully everything goes okay, but I appreciate your patience as I figure it all out. So I am in Ohio this week. Last summer my sister invited me. She was like, please, can you come and visit me sometime? And I thought that would be really wonderful. So months ago I got a ticket for myself and Annalise, and we're here visiting my sister in Ohio at the Lamson's house. And I was kind of sad because I was going to miss Sunday service and miss seeing everybody. but I'm happy that I actually get to give my service this Sunday. So I hope we enjoy it all together. And I'm going to start off with our announcements since I don't have an MC. I'm going to do everything. But I have our announcements, and I have a service, and I had some music. So let's see here. I'm going to pull up the announcements real quick, go through those with you real fast. Oops, I got to share my screen. I got to remember that. Okay, so I'm hoping that you can see this. Maybe you can even see me too. Let me turn this to a slideshow. This is on my way. Let's see here. Beginning. Okay. All right, so we didn't want to skimp on doing the announcements or anything because there's some really awesome things coming up in the next week. One is that Children's Day is this coming Saturday on November 18th. It's the 58th True Children's Day, and we're going to celebrate here at church at 7 in the morning with a prayer, an offering table, pledge service, and also breakfast. And it's a Saturday, so that means that if you have kids, you can bring them and they can experience our traditions in our faith. So I'm really excited. This is a Saturday, and that if possible, you can come with your kids. Also, after pledge service, we're going to be going to, let's see, I'm in the way. I'll put myself over here. At 9 o'clock, we're going to head over to the Wheat Ridge Rec Center. Even if you can't make it for pledge service, you're welcome to come to the rec center. We're going to have swimming and sauna, basketball, there's rock climbing, childcare, and the pizza lunch provided. So you can stay as long as you want. We're paying for admission for everybody for a day. Also, childcare for kids, I believe 3 or under, or anybody who wants childcare. The church will be providing an hour of childcare for kids. So if grown-ups would like to do something that they can't do with their babies, you can have them taken care of for an hour. Also, this just shows some pictures of they've got a really great swimming area. So I'm sure that'll be a big hit, especially with the kids. There's like a lazy river. There's a frog slide. This looks like a big slide over here. And there's also rock climbing. And so I believe that you can get an instructional lesson for free. So if you're interested in learning some rock climbing, anything about that, then you can also do that. So you can, and I think it's at noon. If you're interested in rock climbing, it's at noon. So just have that in your mind. Also, there's a new 7-day Divine Principle retreat, and it's for young adults. It's called Going Deeper. I think they're going to do a few, but the one closest to us is going to be at IPEC from January 3rd through the 9th. This is great because you have some time before it happens. You can plan it out, see how you can make it work. But if you are a young adult and you're interested in taking some time, I just really love having the opportunity to separate from everything, kind of like me coming to Ohio, get away from school, get away from the people you're always around, and just focus on you and your life and your relationship with God and seeing what the DP really means for you. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. In addition to that, we have our usual Divine Principle retreats going on, a 7-day and a 4-day one. November coming up this week, and in December. So partial scholarships are available. So please talk to Mike or I if you're interested in those. And next week is going to be our Thanksgiving dinner lunch. Thanksgiving lunch before Thanksgiving. And the Ilsham class is going to be cooking and cleaning for that. So I know they're going to be working hard and prepping for a few days ahead of time. It's going to be really awesome lunch and experience. So this coming weekend is just going to be really exciting. We've got Children's Day, we've got the Rec Center, and we've got our Thanksgiving lunch. So everybody please come to church next Sunday. Okay, I think that's the end of the announcements. Okay, and I think you can see me again. So I'm just going to start with a prayer and then go into the service. Okay, please be in prayer. Good morning, most beloved Heavenly Parent. We love you. We're grateful that even though we are not together in person today, that still we are able, through the amazing technology, to be together in heart and spirit. And we also know that you are with each and every one of us at our homes and our work. And I pray that the same spirit that you love to participate in and give us at church can also be with us today. Pray that you can be with each one of us as we go on into the week. Please help us to practice love and practice. We're transitioning from our first sermon series on the first blessing into the second blessing. And today we're going to be talking about practice. And pray that somehow through this message that each and every one of us it can really resonate in our hearts, that we don't want to be people who just believe things. We don't want to be people who just think the right things. But we really want to be people of integrity. We want to be people who know what's correct in our heart, and then we also have the courage to act on it. We have the courage to love when it's difficult to love. We have the courage to stand up when it's difficult to stand up. We have the courage to, sometimes just going about our daily life can be a challenge, but I pray that we can have the courage to do it with love and integrity. And I know that sometimes it's hard in the moment, but the blessings that come from it and the ripples effects that we create through being centered people, being people centered on you, goes way beyond just ourselves. And we're going to explore that a little bit more today, but I pray you can be with us. And I offer this prayer in my name, Michael Antonia Hendrick, Blessed Joe Family, Adieu. All right. So my topic today is called practice. And I have a PowerPoint, and I'm going to be switching back and forth a little bit, and hopefully that's not too distracting, but I think it'll still be good. So, as I mentioned, I'm here in Ohio. I'm grateful that I can be with my sister and that I can be with you on a Sunday morning. And this week we are wrapping up our first, what's it called, like a session of our sermon series. You know, we're having a sermon series of, just a second. We're doing our sermon series on the three great blessings. So our first sermon series is on the first blessing. And in the Bible, we know that God created Adam and Eve and then gave them three blessings. He gave them the commandment not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he gave them three blessings. Like, this is what you do. This is life. This encompasses everything that you need in your life. And the first blessing was to be fruitful. So a tree, when it's fruitful, that means that it is mature enough to bear fruit, right? It means it is able to stand on its own as a fully mature tree, and then is able to multiply itself, right? Through creating seeds, through creating fruit that can then create new trees. So for us, of course, we aren't trees. We're not going to grow apples on our fingers. But what God is saying by being fruitful is that we also need to become fully mature people. We need to be spiritually mature people. We need to be artistically mature people. In order to create good fruits, whether you look at that as multiplying and having children who then grow up to be mature people, or even good fruits in our life through our actions and multiplying goodness to the people around us. So, and once we become fruitful, mature trees or mature people, then we can multiply. And that is the second blessing. And that is what we're going to begin talking about next week. So this is kind of a transition phase. I'm going to wrap up talking about the first blessing. So let's talk a bit about our foundation. I know in our church, we say the word foundation a lot. We talk about the foundation of faith and the foundation of substance and the foundation for the Messiah. And we're kind of trained to hear the word foundation and go, oh yes, that's an important, very important word. But do we really know the importance of having a strong foundation in our life? So I started to think about just the word foundation and just practical, even simple daily examples of why a foundation is important. And actually, the first thing that I thought of was fireworks. My kids love fireworks. I've loved fireworks growing up. But something that I've learned is that when you have one of those big fireworks, like it's a cannon type thing and it shoots out balls or it shoots out rockets, you have to put that firework on solid, flat ground. You have to. I remember my kids bought a firework that they were really excited to do. You know, they kind of put their money together so they could have this special firework that was going to shoot up in the sky. And they plopped it on the ground and they lit it and it flopped over and shot into the grass. And they didn't realize that they had to make sure that the ground that they put it on was flat and solid. And maybe there was some grass stuck under it, so it was a little bit shaky, or maybe it was rough and bumpy. And then I felt bad for them because they didn't really get to enjoy their firework. I was grateful it didn't shoot toward us. But that's just one example of how we need a firm, strong foundation. This week, the night that I arrived here in Ohio, my sister took me to her pottery class. And I've always loved pottery. My next door neighbor growing up was a potter. And I've always loved it. But mostly in my experience of pottery has been doing pinch pots and coil pots. If you know anything about pottery, there's basically three things you do. You do pinch pots, coil pots, or you can throw on a wheel. And I've never really had a chance to experience throwing on a wheel until I came to my sister's class on Wednesday night. And she warned me, she was like, you may not get anything, you may not come out with a finished piece from this class because throwing on the wheel is just very frustrating to start with. It takes a lot of practice. And so I went in without any expectation, but it was amazing to me how much preparation you needed to do before you could even put the clay on the wheel. Like the wheel is the thing that spins around and you shape it, with your hands onto a mug or a cup. And before you can even put the clay on the wheel, you've got to wedge it, which is where you like knead it and you work out any little air bubbles, because if there are air bubbles, then your piece will crack or explode or something. And you spend a long time kneading it and checking it to make sure it doesn't have any air bubbles. And then you throw this ball of clay onto the middle of your wheel and start spinning it. And before you can do anything, before you can start to shape it or form it or anything, you have to get this ball of clay perfectly centered in the middle of the wheel. And the way you do that is like you kind of wedge your elbow against your thigh and you make your arm like really stiff and strong and straight. And when the clay is spinning, whenever it touches your hand, your hand is not supposed to move. It's not supposed to bump it. Otherwise, you can never center it. You have to like be perfectly straight so that the clay can conform and become perfectly centered on the wheel. And when it happens because your hand is like constantly bumping because the clay is not perfectly centered. But once you can get your hand like absolutely straight and nothing can move it, you kind of have to tense your whole body to make it happen. And then the clay conforms to it. It's like magic. It feels like, you just know that you've got it right because everything is running so smoothly. And then from there you can make the hole in it. You can pull up the walls. You can make a cup. I made a kind of a goblet on accident, a plate, a vase. But I realized that almost all of the work is getting the ball centered in the middle of the pot, in the what's it called, the wheel. And without that, you don't have a foundation to make anything. As soon as you start, if you don't have it complete centered and you start to pull up the walls, then it starts to get floppy, and it will just like collapse on itself or fall apart. So it was a really interesting lesson to me that so much of everything in throwing pottery on the wheel is just making the foundation. It's just getting centered. Another example I have is from the Bible, and I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you now. So let's see here. Okay, so this is my PowerPoint and practice. Oh, now I'm in the way again. Let's see. Okay. This is from Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. And you may be familiar. This is a pretty common quote from the Bible, but I don't think we've talked about it yet since we've been here. So this is a great one. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. So the key is in this verse about, let's see if I can go back. Practice. It doesn't say everyone who hears these words of mine and agrees with them is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Or it doesn't say everyone who hears these words of mine and turns around and tells someone else that they should do them is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Or it doesn't say, everyone who hears these words of mine and thinks about them a lot and reads them again and again is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. No, it says everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. You can hear the words. If you can hear the words, but you do not put them into practice, then you're like a foolish man who built your house on sand. Okay, back to me. So I love this verse because it, actually I think there was a Bible song I used to sing. We sing Bible songs, and it was about the wise man who built his house upon the rock. And I really didn't get the true meaning of it back then, but I love it. So the things that we've been talking about the past 6 weeks in this sermon series about removing the obstacles to growth, removing your fallen natures, developing a relationship of love and trust with God as a parent, and the principles of growth, these are actually the hardest things. The hardest things. Now, I know that we've often said that our relationship with our spouse is the hardest thing, right? Our relationships in our family is the hardest thing, because this is the point where Adam and Eve fell away from God, was when it came to their relationship, a sexual relationship between them and to create a family. But I think this is only because we didn't get our foundation right. This should not be the hardest thing. Just like, getting this piece of clay centered in the center of a pottery wheel. That's the hardest part about everything. And the rest of it is just skill and maneuvering and working things right. I think that the reason why our relationships with our spouse and our families are the hardest thing is because we don't actually have our foundation. Many of us built our houses or our families on sandy ground or loose gravel, right? And so we have to expend a lot of energy and heart, and it's difficult to try to hold our house together when our foundation isn't solid. But I really believe that through, like, reading through the principle of creation, that if we really got everything right, through our formation stage, through growing up as a child and learning proper relationships and learning integrity, that when the time came for us to create a family, that actually it would be a very natural process. The reason why it's the hardest thing to make our relationships work is because maybe we didn't know how to create a firm foundation to begin with, and we've already built a house on some shaky ground. And of course, we have a great foundation in having the blessing. We know true parents. We stand on incredible foundation and merit. But even so, we each need our own foundation to build our own house on. And since a lot of us have already built our houses, then we have to shore up our foundations. We have to stabilize them. We have to, we have to work harder to make, to protect it, to strengthen it, to expand our foundation, even as we have our house. And so the way we do this is in practice. Practice doing these hardest things. Like Mike's dad, oh my gosh, he gave a great message last week. He encouraged everyone to pick the hardest person, pick the person that you don't like to look at, that you don't like to think about, and practice serving them and loving them this week. Practice doing the hardest thing. Practice keeping your word and your integrity. Practice keeping your promises. I used to think it was, I was really good at keeping promises because I actually only promised easy things. But practice promising something big, something important, and then practice giving all of your energy to fulfill on that big promise. Practice being on time. That's a very simple and yet foundational part of integrity. You learn a lot about yourself when you commit to being on time to things when you aren't normally. You begin to realize, oh, I know that in order to be on time, I need to leave now. Why is it that it's hard for me to leave now? Is there something that I don't prepare ahead of time? Or is it even something in my mindset that's always preventing me from being on time? It is interesting to just, even something very simple to keep your integrity with, or to practice being on time. If you commit to even something simple like that and you do it, you learn a lot about yourself. There's another quote from Father here. Beep, 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 beep. Get my PowerPoint back. Where did it go? Okay, oops. Okay. Just try at least for 3 years to concentrate your efforts on making your mind and body into one, and you will experience God abiding in you, working through you. Now, Father's saying try for at least 3 years. And I really like that he does this, because I think it just kind of shifts my mindset out of feeling like I have to be perfect now, and recognizing that it's a process. And for anybody, it's a process, and it's a long process. It's even a lifelong process. So I think this can also help you to not be discouraged if you don't see results overnight, or if you sometimes slip up and make mistakes. But it also encourages to take this lifelong perspective. And speaking of perspective, let's see here. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have shared there. I'll go back. Okay. Um, Speaking of perspective, also another great thing to practice, and this might be one of the most important things to practice, is seeing from God's viewpoint. I know that we hear this a lot, and even Mike and I have given a lot of messages about seeing from God's perspective. But really, how do we practice seeing from God's perspective? I was actually thinking about classical conditioning. If you've studied psychology at all, you've heard of Pavlov's dogs. And it was a scientist who, back in the 1880s, he was studying the process of salivation in dogs. But he began to notice that, normally dogs salivate when they see food and they're about to eat and they're eating. But he began to notice that dogs would start salivating even when he walked in the room before he ever showed them food or they began eating. And so he realized that you can train dogs or yourself to have a certain response to a specific stimulus, even if originally they would not be connected, right? And so he practiced with other things. He would feed them their food and he would ring a bell. And he would do that, 10 times. And then he'd walk in and he would ring a bell without putting the food, and the dogs would salivate, right? So he recognized that we can train ourselves to have a specific response, even if it isn't our natural programmed response. So with a little bit of classical conditioning, we can make it so that every time we experience something that's frustrating or unpleasant, that we do that little switch. We switch to seeing from God's viewpoint. So wouldn't it be awesome if every time somebody cuts you off in traffic and you want to yell something out the window, or every time your wife says that thing that she always says and you react the way that you always react, instead of reacting the way you always react, it's that switch. It's that time to see from God's viewpoint. Or when somebody wrongly accuses you of something that you didn't do, and you feel like you have every right to prove how right you are, right? And then when that adrenaline and those emotions start to rise, that we recognize that feeling and we switch. We classically condition ourselves to see from God's viewpoint. We trigger our God's viewpoint response, right? And this only comes through practice. And it usually feels uncomfortable to practice something, especially if it's not something that we do practice very often. I was definitely uncomfortable throwing pots. I was so happy that on my first ball of clay that I was able to somehow hit that sweet spot where the clay wasn't bumping against my hand, but it was just like perfectly conformed to it and everything was still and I could make something. But the rest of the class, I couldn't get to that point again. I spent probably 2.5 hours trying with balls of clay to get them to be perfectly smooth and still and centered, and I couldn't. It was frustrating. But it's practice. I now look at my sister's, her house is full of pots and mugs and planters and all these things that she made, and now I know that the only way she could have gotten to them is by mastering, right, the foundation of getting that ball centered on the wheel. And I know that she only did it through practice. And it's an amazing feeling to know when you're growing. It can be, especially the first few times that you try to do something that you don't feel as comfortable to do, you don't feel is your natural response, like you're just trying to see from God's viewpoint. Maybe your natural response is to yell, or maybe you've got a conditioned response that to say something a certain way when your kid says something a certain way. And it can seem really hard and scary to to try something different. But once you do it a few times, it's amazing how fulfilling that feeling is, knowing that you did the hard thing and practiced seeing from God's viewpoint. I'm a little worried my battery is going to die, so I might switch. I might move this, and I'm afraid my nice little background is probably going to change, but I don't want to lose you, so just give me a minute. Okay. I worked so hard to get it all set up so the background was nice. But anyway, I'm still here. So, okay. Oh, I'm almost done. So when we have this foundation for our life, and it's a foundation that it's not like, something also about foundations. If you build a house, foundations are laid stone by stone and brick by brick. It's not something you can just do one big action on and be like, okay, I've got my foundation. I'm good. I've got this all worked out. A foundation is something that we build over time, and we build action by action, choice by choice, practice by practice. And is uncomfortable. I hope you don't feel uncomfortable when I say that, but I know that I've had that uncomfortable feeling of, I don't want to be pushed. I don't want to be challenged. I'm not necessarily happy with the way things are, but I'm comfortable with the way things are. I know that if I know how things are going to go in my life, and if I start doing things differently, I don't know what kind of results I'm going to get in my life. It might not work out. It might be scary. But I encourage you to step out on that faith that when we take good actions, we make good deposits into our spiritual bank account, and the results of that always show up in our life, and the results of that actually ripple out beyond what we can even see. This leads me to my next quote. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Okay, here it is. This is from James chapter 1, verses 2 through 3. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Consider it joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. So we're building our foundation, or we could also say that we are deepening our roots. I like to think of a tree. I don't know if you've ever been in a big storm. Fortunately, I have never been in a hurricane. I know that Texas and Florida experience extremely, 120 mile per hour winds. But I remember once a few years ago, I was at my parents' house, and it was like a tropical storm. There was like 65 mile per hour winds. And it was just crazy. My parents live in Missouri, where in Colorado, trees are kind of short and stubby. I think because there's not so much water and the ground is really hard. But in Missouri, the trees are long and slender, and they go so high up in the sky. And I was watching these trees like bending over in the wind, and then springing back up, and then blowing back over again. And I was thinking that they were going to snap and the trees were going to go flying through our house or something. I knew that if I had been out in that wind, that I probably would not have been able to stand on my 2 feet, because I'm just standing on top of the ground. But the trees have roots, right? The trees have roots that go deep into the ground, so that no matter how strong the winds blow, they can blow and blow and blow. But eventually the storm dies down, and the tree is still standing, and it's still growing. So our lives can be like this, right? Storms don't happen often, in Missouri, but they do come. And in our life, we may not always be experiencing trials and difficulties, but the winds will come, the storms will come. Life has our trials and our tribulations, but instead of getting blown off our feet, or instead of cursing the wind and asking God, why do I have to go through such trials? Why did this have to happen? Why is my family member sick? Why can't I get the job that I want? Instead of blaming circumstances or making excuses, James was saying, actually, this was Jesus saying, was it James? No, it was James. He was talking to Jesus' disciples that were like scattered after his death. And he said, consider it a joy that when you go through your trials and difficulties, that you are strengthening your endurance. So he's also saying, see from God's viewpoint. It may not be a joyful experience. It may not be something that we're happy with, but see from God's viewpoint and see what might be possible out of this situation that was not possible before. And even out of strengthening my heart, strengthening my soul, strengthening my love, that once this dies down, once this is over, I'll have more to go forward with. I can do even more for my family. I can do more for God. James said that we can strengthen our endurance, but Father really takes it even a step further. He says, even though you are faced with difficulty, remind yourself of this. When you go through hardships, you must think of obstacles as a chance to build a better world. So Father is always challenging us to not just think of ourselves, right? He's always at the top level. And he also always saw his challenges, even if it was fishing on the ocean, that he was making conditions to create a foundation for a better world. So I think we can always learn from Father as our top example on what kind of attitude to have and how we deal with trials and difficulties. So with that, I'd like to finish our session on the first blessing, and I'm excited for next week to move into the realm of our family relationships in the second blessing. I'm going to offer a prayer, and I just want to one more announcement at the end, and then we'll see you next week. But please join me in prayer. Good morning, Heavenly Parent. Thank you again for this day. Thank you for us being able to come together as family and to hear from you, your words, and to learn better how we can manage ourselves. Sometimes we want to manage other people. Sometimes we want to manage our kids. We want to manage our spouse. But first and foremost, you teach us we need to manage ourselves. We need to manage our heart. We need to manage our emotions, our reactions. We need to create a firm foundation. Thank you for this message this morning, and we want to offer to you. And I pray this in my name, Michael Andoni Hedrick, Blessed True Family, Aju. All right. So once again, thank you for joining. At this point in our service, normally we would do our offering song and have the tithe come up. Please give your offering. You can mail it to the church. You can mail it to 3418 West 14th Avenue, Denver, Colorado 80204. Or if you'd like, you can go to our webpage, which is coloradofamilychurch.org, and you can click donate. I'm actually going to show you real quick where that is, just so if you haven't looked at our website yet and you haven't seen it, that you can check it out. Let's see here. All right, it's going to load for a second, but I'm going to show you where you can donate here. There we go. Okay, so this is Colorado Family Church webpage, and underneath there is the donate button on the right. You can click on that, and then you can do it however you want. You can make it your tithe, You can make a specific use donation. You can donate a specified amount or any amount that you want, and then enter your card information and do that there. So those are the options you have for giving your tithe this week. But once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I really can't wait to see all of you at church. Well, hopefully at the Children's Day celebration for church, and at the Rec Center for Children's Day on Saturday, and for our Thanksgiving service on Sunday. So have a wonderful week. God bless you all. And also feel free to reach out if you miss me or you want to just talk with me or Mike. You can always call us. You can always send us an email. And even though we didn't connect in person this week, we'd still love to talk with you. So feel free anytime to give us a call, and we'll see you next week. Okay. Bye.